Hello and welcome to another Q&A video. So firstly, apologies for how horrendously long it has taken me to get to actually compiling this. It took way longer than I wanted it to, and I will hopefully aim to be being able to do these more regularly. It really depends a lot on sort of the number of questions coming in, and it ended up being a case last time of there weren't too many questions, so it would have been a very short video, and there would have been, by the time there was enough, things got a little sort of hectic with everything last year. So I think what I'll do in future is possibly look at having, doing some ones I might be able to cover them as actual shorts, I think could be good. So that's sort of the plan going forward, so that I'm hopefully not taking as horrendously long as I did this time. So let's dive on in. So one of the questions was about how I'd approach sort of sharing the map or world changes in a procedurally generated world with a newly joined player. Which is a really good question and a really challenging sort of area. So if it's a procedurally generated environment, which with this was sort of generally in reference to that, then things that I could do is I could send through stuff like the seed plus any generation parameters, and I could then send through alongside that essentially deltas, the sort of changes. So if something has been removed or added, details of those changes that have happened, whether those are to terrain or more sort of things that have been placed in the world or built in the world. So having that combination of here's the baseline thing to generate the reference, and then here's the set of changes. If it isn't procedurally generated, then you'd be looking at more sending through sort of the name of the map or a unique identifier for it. And again, you'd have that same set of deltas. So in both cases, you'd have a set of changes on top of that. Now with the deltas, one of the things that I would generally do is organize them, so what's called spatially, so based upon location. So making it that I can retrieve the ones that the newly joining player is going to see first, retrieving them at the beginning, and then loading the other ones over time. So that way then could be able to get them into the world quicker, and then have enough time to actually be loading the other areas. So that's sort of how I'd look at approaching that. Another question that I do get a bunch of times is if I'll create templates for specific game types. And sometimes these are very specific, very detailed things of like a template, can I create a template? Essentially, quite a detailed one of a very specific implementation of a game. And the short answer is no. The longer answer is these, especially the ones that get outlined, would take a very large amount of time to create. And if I'm creating them and releasing them, then I also want to be supporting them. I don't want to create stuff and then not actually support it. So I would need to be supporting them, and that's time that is just not available to me. So that's sort of at its simplest. But there's also a huge amount of effort involved in making a good modular template, and I don't think they make good teaching material either. The reason being is that they're a very specific implementation of a very specific game, whereas I want to try and generally be looking at more sort of reusable components that could be added to a wide variety of games. So I really prefer to invest my time in teaching people how to make those components rather than building a template, which, to build a template for some of the games that get suggested, it would be not even weeks worth of time, but actually months and many months worth of time. And in that same amount of time, I could do and do create many videos in that area. So I think it allows me to help more people, and I think to a greater level, developing sort of teaching material. So templates for specific game types is a thing that I'm just never going to be doing. One question I did get was how many videos are left, which was expressed in a very shouty way. Simple answer is there is no end in sight. My set of topics is always growing longer rather than shorter, and often is growing faster than I'm able to get through videos, through sort of the process of creating ones. I'm never running out of things that are areas to do tutorials on, because I'll play new games, and as I'll see things in those games, that gives me ideas of areas I want to cover. People also have been really great with making suggestions or things where like, cool, I'd love to be able to do this. And that gives me lots of ideas. So the list of topics is never, ever running out. And I really enjoy creating the videos. It's one of the things that drew me to teaching is I like being able to help people, and I really enjoy making these resources for people. And people seem to find them useful, which is great. So not going to be stopping anytime soon. Our question got was about how I'd scale up the Sims AI to potentially support thousands of them. And that's a really good question, because that's something that often defeats us with a project. Is it's easy to get something really sophisticated working where you've got one, two, or a very small number of the characters, but then when you want a large number, that can be really challenging. So scaling that up requires there's a lot of tricks that we can use for it. One of the things that I would definitely look at now that it's sort of considered a ready-to-use system in Unity is the entity component, the ECS system. Looking at something like of that for being able to scale up to support thousands of ones, I think would be my starting point with it. Now, I haven't worked with ECS yet. I have looked into it, and I do want to make use of it. I've got a couple of ideas that I want to be working on for that. Some that would sort of tie a little bit into this, but so I haven't got a direct reference there that I can sort of refer people to for it. But I think from all of my looking into it, I think it would be the way that I would look at doing that. And once I've got that, what I feel is a good sense of advice that is going to be useful and helpful to give in terms of stuff like ECS, then I will be putting together tutorials for it. But at the moment, I don't feel that I know enough to actually be to know the correct advice really to be giving people. But that would be the main approach I would probably look at for it. Often get questions about the Unity version I'm using. So I always generally am using the latest tech stream release. I usually keep pretty up to date with that. And I'll version lock when a project gets near ship for safety. So that's something I am in the habit of doing, just to remove potential things that could go wrong. But otherwise, I generally stick with the latest tech stream. It has bitten me at times. Not going to lie and say that it hasn't bitten me. It absolutely has. I have had cases where I'll update to the latest version, and then 10 minutes later I am uninstalling it and going back to an earlier version. That's happened a few times. It doesn't happen often though. So I always use the latest tech stream, and same with the videos. That's generally what I'm doing there. And so especially for a project that might have multiple parts, multiple videos to it, you'll see it will get progressively upgraded through that life cycle. But version locking when you get near to sort of starting in that delivery phase for a project, I think is a really good thing to be doing for safety, and I'll always do that. So best way to speed up the hearing and vision systems. And this sort of ties into a little bit the earlier question with scaling up the Sims AI side of things. So one of the things is, and this is aside from sort of ECS things, We can be distributing the checks over multiple frames. Not every AI needs to check every bit of information every frame. We can distribute it over multiple frames. And that doesn't need to be uniform either. So we can prioritize closer AIs or AIs that are currently engaged in doing something. Those ones could be doing those checks more frequently, and ones that are a lower priority, whether they're further away or doing less, could be running those checks less frequently. So that's where we're talking about level of detailing or lotting of the checks. So that's a really valuable thing to be having in there, and you can get a pretty significant improvement. And our goal is not to make it necessarily perfectly efficient, but our goal is to create enough bandwidth that our AIs that are actively engaging with the player are able to run to the level that we need them to create a good experience for the player. So ECS, I think, would absolutely be something we could potentially look at there. And again, that requires a few more changes in terms of how we structure the code. And that's a fairly significant restructuring, but again, has the potential there to give us some pretty significant improvements. So another question about expanding the villager AI to include things like sleep cycles, resources, regrowing, areas like of that. Yes, quite likely. It is an area that I do want to continue adding more to. I really enjoy making those kinds of AIs. I mean, I like making any kind of AI, to be honest. But it is an area that I do want to continue to expand upon, including looking at things like these sleep cycles and schedules in general, looking at ways of making it run more efficiently. So those are all things that absolutely I do want to look at. Another one that came up was how to approach a grid system where there's restrictions on what can go where. So kind of like a building placement sort of setup. So I'd probably look at with this something where you've got a tagging or capability based approach. So each item is tagged for its capabilities, so defining where it can be placed and what it is. So then what you can do is have things like a table would be able to say, yep, it can be placed on a floor. And a vase would be flagged as, okay, it can be placed on a table. Or you could have, a vase be tagged as like a cosmetic item or something like. I'm not sure what the suitable term there. Naming things is always a challenge. But you could also have it have a particular tag, and the table says, well, here are the things that are allowed to be, the tags that are allowed to actually be placed upon me. So that's something that I think is how I would look at approaching it. Something that also came up was, can I cover on structuring things for large projects? And the answer to that is yes. That it is something that I'd like to cover more in the future. And I have actually just, even today, recorded a video where I run through sort of more on the technical side in terms of how I would recommend approaching structuring things for larger projects and the kind of issues that we can run into there. So I've already produced or put together a video on that will be coming out in a bit. And that's something where if there's further areas that would be of interest that you'd like me to talk about with this, just mention those in the comments and I'll note those down because it is an area that I do want to cover more in the future. Another one that came up was about making tutorials on a thing called UniRx. And it was actually something that I wasn't aware of until it got mentioned in a comment. And so it's not something I'm familiar with at all. I did a little bit of initial looking into it. So while I haven't used it yet, it does look interesting. And I don't know enough yet to know whether it's something that I will make a tutorial on. For me, the criteria when I'm making a tutorial in particular, I'm very cautious about making tutorials that are dependent upon third-party assets, even if those are free ones. because if those are, I want to make sure that those are continuing to be supported, that there's good resources and that there for it. So I'm always a little bit cautious with tutorials on particular third-party ones like of that. So I do want to have a look at it. I am planning to use it on a project and see how I find it. That's going to be the main thing that'll determine whether I look at doing tutorials on it. At the moment, it looks interesting, and I'm not quite sure exactly how I will best use it on the project. But what I'm going to do is a project that I have done the design side, the initial design side for, and that I'll be kicking off probably in the next couple of days, actually, with luck. I want to look at using it on that, and that's going to be my key for sort of deciding how I find it, getting an understanding of what's going to be useful things for tutorials to happen, to cover with that, and then that's how I'll look at it. So that is it as far as the questions go. I will put the link in the description below for if you want to submit further questions. So again, I do want to apologize for how long it took me to get to many of the questions. I do want to make sure that that doesn't happen again. So thank you, folks, for your patience with how long it has taken me to get to these. I am going to aim to do better in the future, and I've got a few plans around that. And if you've got further questions, you can either submit them via that form, or if you've got questions that might be shorter form ones of them in particular, feel free to throw those into the comments below. But until next time, bye.